Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Miles, and you're tuning in at Xraised, where knowledge meets inspiration in the intricate dance of industry evolution. Stay with me as we explore the ideas, people, and innovations shaping the future of business, law, and the world we're all trying to build together. This episode is one I've been really excited about because it sits at the intersection of something we're all feeling right now. AI is changing how we learn, how we work, and how we prepare the next generation of thinkers. And to unpack all of this, we have two brilliant minds with us. First, someone you already know and love here at Xraised, an award winning barrister, the founder and CEO of MiAI Law, and a woman redefining how legal research is done with AI driven accuracy, security, and transparency. She's the 2021 Female Barrister of the Year, recently named Most Influential CEO 2025 Legal Tech Sydney. And joining her is someone whose career has lived at the crossroads of law, AI regulation, public sector innovation, and the governance of emerging technologies. He helps governments rethink digital infrastructure, guides organizations through tech transformation, and teaches at the University of Queensland Center for Policy Futures. A recognized thought leader in AI, trustworthiness, digital twins, and the future of cities. He's also a familiar voice across ABC, SBS, and national policy discussions, and Associate Director at KPMG Australia, Dr. Brydon Timothy Wang. Good morning, everyone.
Good
Morning. Thank
Morning.
you
morning.
so much for
Okay,
having me.
now we're out of time now that we spent so much time
I
introducing.
know it's so hard to
Okay.
compress your achievements, guys. Please help me. Well, it's a pleasure having you both, and I'm sure this will be an accessible episode. How should students and future professionals be trained for an AI legal and governance landscape? And I think we're all wondering when the machine can deliver an answer before a student has even typed the question, what's left for us to learn? What becomes the real purpose of education now? I mean, in your view, what skills matter most for the next wave of professionals entering the field?
I think we need to to land on this particular concept, which I find quite challenging. So when I used to teach in a law school, so I don't teach in a law school anymore, there was a perception that law schools were developing thinkers and they didn't serve the legal industry. And I struggled with that concept quite a bit because I come from industry. I had a bit of a career before I went into academia, and I think any law school would be very hard pressed to attract students if they weren't accredited by a legal professional board, saying that, hey, this degree is going to be accepted by industry. So I think a lot of law schools need to take their cue from what industry is doing. And I think the legal industry has moved away from prohibition on AI to adoption of AI. And yet, a lot of law schools are still taking that very hard stance of saying that, we prohibit any use of AI, or control it in a very in a way that is impractical and doesn't develop the sort of people that we need in the industry. Now, when I was at QUT, I won actually the Vice Chancellor's Award for integrating sort of legal research with LLMs and AI. And I've spoken with industry. I've worked now in outside of the law, but still in the commercial industry, and I've spoken with the judiciary in relation to this issue. And I think that we need to be a lot more proactive. We shouldn't take stances where we say law students cannot use this at all. And I think we need to be very, very clever in the way we assess and bring on board stuff. I think the fundamental question that Lena and I need to sort of ask today is, do legal students sit in a separate bucket, such that they need to be treated very differently from the rest of the legal profession in relation to how we use AI technologies?
Uh-huh. Well said. Would you like to add some more to that, Lena?
Yes,
Please.
actually, I've just come back from Texas. I was at the Legal Tech Fund Summit in Austin Hill last week, and I had the pleasure of meeting a lecturer from the University of Seattle Law School. Her job is to teach the students on how to use all the various tools. She even teaches them how to use Harvey.
Oh,
And so that is just like such a completely different attitude to what we're getting from Australian universities. As you and I know, Miles, one dean of the law school ended up
yeah.
standing us up because she didn't want to come on, and we suspect because maybe they hadn't done anything
Yeah, I
to
know.
implement.
Yeah.
That's our suspicion, but she stood us up right at the last minute. But my suspicion was because the university hadn't really done much to integrate AI teaching into the syllabus. That is my suspicion, because we can't confirm that. But the attitude in America is so different. And what was really exciting was I got to show uh, this lecturer, Leanne, she was great, what MiAI Law was doing. And she said, actually, she said, my God, if I had had these tools when I was the in-house counsel, this would have been just so fantastic, right? To do that
Uh-huh.
the first cut through a contract to tell you how it would stack up in a court of law. And so I think it's really important. And then another thing, I met another amazing person on the plane from Austin to LA on Saturday night. And she told me about the quote that Einstein had said, and she said, go and look up the precise quote. And so this is what is attributed to Einstein. And supposedly he said that if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. And for once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. And then he also said, not in the same quote, he said the important thing is to not to stop questioning. So just because you have AI doesn't mean you know how to unlock the answers that are held within the AI. So we're experiencing this a lot with our users for MiAI Law. They really need to be trained on how to use our product. And so it really comes back to Einstein. You have to know the right questions to ask. And in order to know the right questions to be asked, you do have to have legal education.
Right.
So it becomes a different way of approaching how you get to the answer. But I am very clear from my own use of my model that context really matters. And if I don't know the subject matter area at all, I start with a general question. I get the answer, I
Mhm.
read the research report, we check the links, we check everything, and then we see, all right, there are sub issues here that I need to track down. And then we ask more questions. And then the reports come back, we look at it, go, wow, we didn't realize, right? There are even more issues that we need to consider. And then you keep going, you keep asking the questions. So it is like Einstein says, I don't need you to sit there for 55 minutes wondering what's the first question to ask my AI law. But you don't do that. But you need to be a lawyer to know what is the first question you can ask. Because when you're a layperson, you don't even know what to ask at all. So you need to
Correct.
ask that first question to start off the chain of inquiry. And then you need to be a lawyer to be able to understand the relevance of the research answers you're getting, and that your skill then becomes in knowing how to further interrogate the model to keep the model is just helping you to chase down the path of reasoning to the correct answer. It's not a one question, It's not like people think AI has come, so therefore all lawyers are redundant. It's not like that. It's a whole chain of inquiry. It requires a whole body of knowledge, and the layperson cannot do it. So I think universities have to learn to teach the students this skill. And last time when we had Tim on the podcast, he kept talking about, critical thinking, but it's critical thinking in this context.
Yeah, I agree. So I don't think that legal students or law students should be treated separately from the profession in terms of their access to these
Mhm.
technologies. But I think Lena does pick up on a very key point where um, a lot of the times their early access to such technology actually
Mhm.
prevents them from developing the full body of understanding. So they're not asking the correct questions, and they can't
Yeah.
identify when AI is providing them or taking down a path of reasoning that just isn't relevant to the actual question at hand. So I think that's the point that I wanted to raise, that there's a bit of a nuance in terms of legal education where a lot of law schools are now taking the approach where saying, look, let's put a blanket ban. It's too difficult to make assessments. How do we know that this is actually the student's work? So I think that that's probably not the correct approach. And I think that if you take down that approach, it comes up with really unhelpful ways of thinking. So for example, when I was speaking to the Queensland Supreme Court justices, they were like, oh, what do you think we should be doing to address the use of this? And I'm like, I think I think people are using it right now. And
Uh-huh.
I think what you need to do is help them do it better rather than take the approach where you penalize them. So, before I left academia, I had students in my office just crying because they were accused of cheating and using these kind of software. And I'm like, well, first of all, how are they proving that you're using it? Unless you're actually copying and pasting, and you can actually identify when a particular dot point. Um, sometimes they use the ChatGPT has a particular graphic that they use for a dot point, and so if you copy that through, you could probably trace that and say that. Or you sometimes people copy the actual frame itself, and so you can see the actual frame come out. But if you're not doing things like, I know. Well, part of me just goes, I don't know whether this is the approach, particularly because I think a lot of students look, yeah, sure, some of them want to cut corners, cost of living pressures. You don't have much time to do as much with your studies. But I think a lot of them are also trying to engage with the technology that they know people are using out there. There's an active desire to really learn and gain the skills. And so I think for those students as well, you've got to be able to provide them with guidance and support. Um, so I think that there needs to be a slight shift in mentality to say, look, students, you need to understand that prompts are so critical in being able to use these kinds of technologies well. And in order for you to come up with really good prompts or questions, or however you want, or instructions to the model, you've got to develop a good understanding of the law. You've
You
got to
do.
love the law. Yeah, you really do.
You
And
do.
so I think if we have that shift in a slight shift in perspective and in conversation, I think you can really get a lot more out of the technology, and have a lot more sensible conversations about the use of large language models and
Mhm.
legal education. But I understand, Miles, so you did ask a very critical overall question at the start, where you asked, oh, what's the point of having law students, or what is the
I
point of
know.
legal education if you
And
can have, you know, um, a software that does this? Well, the answer is really because the software is inert unless you ask it
Yes,
something, right?
exactly.
And so the
mhm.
legal education really gives you the power to ask you the prompts.
That's right.
I don't know if Lena's across this because she's been away, but prompts like so the exercise that I gave the students when I left was that I asked them to talk about the legal effect of prompts, because I had done a paper on whether or not prompts can be used for contract interpretation. And it's really interesting because in Australia, recently we had a freedom of information request go through, and they were able to pull out all the prompts that a senior public official had used in generating certain, I guess, work products in government. So I think the importance of understanding what prompts are and how they can be used, how they're documented, how they can be retrieved, and then what's the effect at law becomes quite critical. So these are conversations that we need to start talking to the students.
Mhm.
You're going to be prompting and writing things into the legal sort of model. What happens next when all these are discoverable? And I think that's
Yeah.
a really interesting question.
Yeah, thank you. And I think what you guys said is a really great reminder that education in general isn't just information anymore. It's uh, being skilled in asking the right questions, because it requires chains of questions, and it's interpreting, it's judging,
But
but
we always had to do this, Miles. We
Mhm,
always had to do it. Research
mhm.
has always been an art. And if you
Yeah.
were doing it manually using the old-fashioned computer
Yeah,
searches, etc., it's still the same questions that you have to think about in your head. And
right.
you're going to look at the cases because you want these particular questions answered. And so all AI is doing is that it's speeding up the response time. But you still have to look at the answers to
Mhm.
critically analyze them to see whether it is answering your question and whether there's any other inquiries that you need to do. It's never a one-stop shop. So
Uh,
it's not like, oh, AI is here now, so that's the end of all lawyers. It doesn't work like that.
mhm. And I
No,
Because
like
even
what
no.
the law, even if you get the answer to the law, if you're you have clients, clients wants particular outcomes. So it's then up to the lawyer to work out what to do with the law to fashion a strategy to provide the client with the outcomes that they're looking for.
Uh-huh. And I like what Dr. Brydon said earlier. Before, it was like prohibiting the use of AI to adapting to AI. In
Yeah.
general, we really have to be clever in using these tools. It's learning how to think in a world where answers are cheap, but wisdom. And Lena and I have been talking about this. Critical thinking are definitely not.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Brydon, let me take that a step further with you. You've seen this up close through government, consulting, academia, all the places where systems meet the real world. Where do you think universities right now are falling short in preparing students for AI integrated professions? I mean, is it the content or the mindset or maybe the pace at which education can adapt?
I think it's all three. I think you've hit the nail on this is such a wicked problem in a sense that if you address it in only one facet, you're going to miss the whole perspective, right? So I think I think one of the questions that you put to Lena and I were if we were to redo a legal education at the start and take a grounds up approach to really thinking about um, an AI subject that university should encounter. I think the first thing we need to do is just bring in industry perspective to say what's happening on the ground,
Mhm.
but also then shaping the conversation. I think there's so much anxiety right now in our student population where they think, we're working so hard and is there a job waiting for me out there? Because it is pretty hard. I think a lot of the times law schools are very adamant about saying that we do not serve the legal industry because a
I
lot of the
don't?
law
Oh,
students.
I really didn't know they
I
said
know, no, this was they said that, and I think I look, Lena, I have to say I have a huge problem with the way that that is positioned because I don't agree with that.
yeah.
Um, because I do think that they think that the legal academy is there to perhaps push and to investigate things that perhaps the legal industry is not focused on. I understand that perspective, but I do think that for students, legal education really was or is oriented on I guess the dream of becoming a lawyer. Now, very few, like I would say less than 50% of law students make it to becoming, lawyers. I could be wrong in that statistic, but I understand that it's a very difficult thing. When I was going through law school, we were told that only say 1 in 6, 1 in 12 of us would actually get into a top tier law firm and then progress with our career. There was a very sort of scary statistic around there.
Yeah.
Now that we understand that industry is cutting down the number of well, actually not all law firms, but a lot of law firms and a lot of other industry players are taking in less graduates, then I think, if you're bringing in industry to have a conversation with students, you've got to shape that conversation and also say, well, let's talk about what the value of work is. Let's talk about what the value of having a pipeline of young graduates coming through in your workforce, right? We are not talking about that in a much more holistic thing. So that's, I think, the industry perspective that needs to be brought in. I think then we need to talk about the actual technology itself, which is where Elena comes in. We're learning about prompts, learning about models, learning about data, learning about bias. That really needs to be shaped into the conversation to really talk about it and get students understanding a lot more. And I think when they realize that data it can be used in different ways and that's how the model is being used, they'll understand that there's much more possibilities there. I think one of the things that people don't really talk about in law school is this whole entire area of legal tech. I remember that I had a student that I was mentoring who couldn't get a job in law, who then went on to actually absolutely fly in the legal tech industry and probably has surpassed me in terms of where he's at. He's fantastic, and I don't think that we talk about these kinds of things enough. So if I were to have this opportunity again with the students, this is the broader conversation that I would bring to the table, and I think that that's absolutely necessary at this point in time. Yeah.
Wow. That's quite alarming when you said that 1 out of 6 students think they have a future in the legal
It
space.
is it is very tricky, and that's without AI being involved. So this is,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, AI has only been around for last 4 or 5 years. But even before that, well, sorry, I shouldn't say AI has only been around for 4 or 5 years. Large language models, in the way they've been used commercially, have only been around for like say,
Right.
4 or 5 years. But but for law students, when I was going through law school, more than a decade ago, that was the anxiety already, and that's only getting worse right now. And so I
Yes,
think
but
any discussion on that must be within that context.
okay. At least in New South Wales, I don't know the statistics for Queensland, at some point we had more lawyers or at the same number of lawyers in law school as there were admitted practitioners. So it's just everybody wants to be a lawyer. I don't know why.
Well, no, I mean everybody wants a legal education. That's what I would say. And there's a dream embedded within it of becoming a lawyer, but a lot of people eventually don't become lawyers.
No,
But
that's
the
true. But
legal
then you would
education,
assume, sorry, but you
yeah,
assume that when you went and did law, in your mind at that time that you thought you would become a lawyer. It ends up
quite a
becoming
few, yes,
something
yeah.
else.
Some people don't. Some people do it because they want to understand how the world works and they want to be protected in a sense. I get it, but not a lot. I agree with you, Lena. I had a huge problem when I was told that law schools do not serve the legal industry.
Who told you that? I had no idea. I've never heard that expression before,
Oh,
but then I have.
this is I think this is a common mentality that sits within legal academia. I know that's
Oh.
a conversation for another time. I think it's
Yeah.
quite controversial if we were to delve
That's
into
right.
that.
Let's have another episode for that. Okay. Well, it just makes a lot of sense because institutions, I think, move slowly, but tech moves really, really fast. And somewhere in that gap, students are left trying to figure out the rules of a game that keeps on changing and changing and really fast. So, Lena, I want to come to you because your early training story is almost the opposite of today's AI era. You started in physical law libraries, building memory and discipline the hard way, the kind that requires patience, a lot of patience and precision, also very strong arms from carrying all those law reports. Which parts of that training do you think today's students should still experience, and which parts do you believe need to evolve, especially as tools like your MiAI Law accelerate research?
I think the beauty of what I learned was grit. So that if it would take me, when I worked for President Kirby, I would prepare draft opinions, judgments for him, and it would take me 3 weeks for every single one. I would
Three.
have to, yeah, 3 weeks. I would have to read the appeal books. The first time I would read the appeal books, I just didn't understand anything. I'd have to read them 3 times, and each time I read them, it became clearer, clearer, clearer. Then I had to do all this research. But the thing is, it just taught me how to stick at it and work through it until I got to the right answer. That same process still has to happen. The AI is just helping you unearth the first set of answers quicker, but then you still have to read the underlying cases and you still have to work out the exact same process of research that I did before. I still have to do it now. It's just that the cases are delivered to me faster, but I still have to read them. So it's cutting out the grunt work from having to manually go and pull the books off the shelf, etc. It's cutting out, me starting off with case-based or whatever it is, unreported judgments online, laws of Australia, etc., and doing my keyword searches so that then it comes back with 2,000 answers. I go, well, that's way too much. Now I got to narrow the search, and you keep narrowing until I get to about 100. Then I go, okay, now I have to look at the 100 cases that I have come back to see which of these might actually be relevant to my answer. And then from that, I cull what is relevant. And then I read all of those cases. So what has happened now is that MiAI anyway, has cut out the first, that initial process to the point where you're given the 20 cases or the 10 cases that are relevant, but then we give you a research report. So we're not just legal research, right? We give you an advanced legal research report, but then you still have to bring your critical mind, you still have to go through and you still have to do that whole research process. So all we've cut out is the painful process at the beginning, but it doesn't mean you can just look at the answer and think that it's just one answer and that's going to get you there. The hard work and the discipline still has to be there to comply with your duty of verification. I think every lawyer and every law student has a duty of verification, but obviously many people don't do that, but it doesn't mean that that duty is still not there. So, for example, the lady I was telling you on the plane, she was in court last week in California, and it was a property matter, and her opponent had named a case that she had never heard of. And so she said to the judge and said, "Oh, Your Honor, I'm not sure it was because of my advanced years, but perhaps I could get the citation of this case that my opponent has just mentioned because I'm unfamiliar with it." And then the judge said, "Yes, I was just going to ask exactly the same question. Of course, it was hallucination." So, so that lawyer just hadn't complied with his duty of verification. So all that still has to be done. And now I think we have an added job because before we would find the case and we would knew it was a real case. But now you might find a case from AI and it's a fake case.
Yeah.
And then you have to go. So I just don't think that AI is going to replace lawyers. All it's done is remove that hard slog to get to that subset of cases that you really have to interrogate and look carefully at to see whether it answers your research problem. It really is the same kind of acceleration of efficiency from when I had to manually note up those judges' notebook, court cases and go and manually write in there, cited by the subsequent case, considered by that, repealed by whatever. I just think it's that same kind of acceleration of efficiency, but it doesn't take away the requirement of the lawyer to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
But the only problem with that is that Laina is a gold star legal practitioner. And I always talk. I have a background in architecture before I came to law, and I always say to these designers, whatever you design, you need to understand that how people will use your designs in the real world are going to be sometimes vastly different to what you think is going to happen. And I think the same risk exists with any sort of legal tech. I think there's that duty to verify, which is exactly what Lena talks about. What if the product is so good and so convincing that someone reading it just goes, "Oh, this is absolutely correct," and you're convinced by that. So one of the research projects that we undertook at the University of Queensland was really looking at recommender systems. And we found that when you have a recommender system with AI, particularly when it's formatted beautifully, it has this weird effect where it convinces you, even though you have all these other duties, it convinces you to actually shift your own internal sort of decision making within yourself to go, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." And you might take a recommendation that is actually incorrect. So a lot of people might form a view that is correct initially. You get this really convincing product from AI, and you go, "Oh, you second guess yourself," and then you switch. And it's much, much better, we found, to provide multi-agent debating. So, I mean, the researchers wanted to call it MAD, and I said, no, we're not calling a system like this MAD and trying to implement it in law. We're going to call it AMADA, and we sort of structured it differently. But it's multi-agent models where everyone is arguing. So you get multiple recommendations presented to you beautifully, and so you then ultimately have to make that decision. That duty of verification then comes up because you see all these too, and then you make a decision and you make that call based on your own understanding and your legal education to then decide what is going to happen. So yeah, no,
that's a really good way of teaching. So that's a really good way of teaching the students, right?
yes, but I
Because
don't see
how
students
can they
learning.
pick? They can't, I mean, they can pick by just guessing, but otherwise, if they want to do it properly, then they have to critically analyze the answers.
Yes, that's exactly how it has to be multi-agent debating. So the what I'm not calling the MAD model, the AMADA model. But the justices were really quite curious about this as well because they were, we cautioned them. I said one of the big problems we have right now is that some of the big experts and people who've been in this industry for a very long time are very good at picking up human error. Very, very sharp, very fast. Instinctively, they read it, they go, "This is wrong." But the problem is the skills that we've picked up and built up over a decade or more, doesn't apply to AI generated kind of hallucinations. You would read that, and your skill set that you've developed to pick up human error will not actually help you pick up a lot of the times these AI generated errors. And so understanding that there's a difference between the two is something that, we flagged with the justices, and they were like, "Oh yes, how do we get better at this?" And so, it's really about developing clear understanding of the 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 quirks in AI generated sort of outputs that you're able to quickly identify. And to be honest, I think law students who are at the code phase of understanding what's happening on the ground will be able to shape discussions much better than people who have been in this industry much longer. So there is a real role for law students with their new knowledge, these digital natives, to really talk about this and bring that to the table. Well, that's my view, at least.
Well,
I've discovered something too, because we had, Brydon, you've seen MiAI Law. We produce research, structured research reports, right? All that is encoded into the back end. And then we had one user who has been trained on how to use Harvey and Lexis, definitely Harvey, because they're benchmarking us against Harvey, who were putting in all these formatting requirements into the prompt. And the formatting requirements were countermanding our own backend. So then he came back and he said, "It'd be really good, if all of your research reports had pinpoint references and hyperlinks to the source material." And I thought, yes, we do have all that. And then I thought, oh my God, I looked at his prompt and it was because his prompt had kind of like undone all our backwards. So now obviously I've coded it up that we ignore everybody's formatting requests because we can't have that. But what I also discovered was that because you cannot guarantee that the model will never hallucinate, because you just can't, because even though I've got all of these guardrails in place, every time there's a small little crevasse, and if the model can go through it, it will. So we've
Yes.
worked that if you get a research report from us, which is not hyperlinked, with pinpoint references that will take you directly to the source, then you know that it's likely to be hallucination. You can never guarantee that a model is not going to hallucinate. Not until I think we fine-tune our own model and change the weights and balances, because the current models that are trained, OpenAI, etc., they're weighted to always answer. So there's a real tendency that it will, if it can find any way to escape your guardrails, it will hallucinate rather than not answering the question. And so now I've discovered that if you get an answer from our model, which doesn't have our usual formatting, doesn't have the hyperlinks, the pinpoint references, etc., and in the footnotes, it will give you the hyperlink, but it'll take you to a blank spot. Then that's the tip that I've given our users. If something like that happens, then it's just escaped its guardrails.
Yeah.
But I spend my whole time, it's called context engineering. I spend my whole time context engineering to stop the model from hallucinating.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway,
bottom line is it's not about choosing old school or new school, but I think giving students grounding and momentum, foundation first, and then acceleration second. There is still a lot of stuff that need to be manually done. As you've said, Lena, it's the
you
grunt
can't
work.
you can't you can't get out of having to read those cases. You
Mhm.
can't. You might have to. Okay, so my brother-in-law, we were all at law school together. He came like fourth in the year at law school, but he would never read as much as I read. He would just be really, really clever student. They would read the bits that they had to know. You know how, Brydon, there are some students who are just so good at doing exams. They know which parts of the cases they have to read. And then I might have read the whole thing, but it was really wasted effort, I think, because all I needed to do was be able to extract the ratio from the case, right? Which is what you really need to know from all the cases that you're studying.
To
The
pass
beauty
exams,
about
but that's not for real life. Just to pass exams, yes, correct. It's an
Yes,
exam
for
technique.
real life. But I think that, if you use the right tool, it can just help guide you to the right path. And I just think that if you have the right tool, it can help develop your thinking. It can just help guide you a bit. It can help train you. Just like the New South Wales Education Department have that EduChat. They never give you the answer, but if a student wants help and they go to EduChat to ask you for help, EduChat will come back and say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? It just guides them on the reasoning process.
Well, I love how you both relate to the same things that work and didn't work, but still, it all comes down to mixing it with hard work and critical thinking, which is hard these days. But I guess this is the perfect time we talk about AI literacy for a moment. Do you think future professionals need to be AI literate meaning they know how to use and interpret AI, or AI resistant, meaning they're trained to challenge, verify, and pressure test the machine. Which mindset creates better thinkers?
I think in order to be AI literate, you got to be using whatever you've termed AI resist. I probably wouldn't call it
Yes.
AI resistant, but
Uh-huh.
everything there, you got to be
AI
cynical.
critical.
Yeah,
Yeah, you have to
yeah,
be AI critical.
Mm-hmm.
To be AI literate, you have to be AI critical as well.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I think when you say AI resistant, it sounds as if you become a Luddite, and then you're like, no, we'll never use any technology. But even when you use that term Luddite, it actually comes with a big context of why they were resistant to technology, right? I think almost as if when we say things like, why are you AI resistant?
uh-huh.
You gotta tease out and figure out why that person is resistant, because they might have some really good gems there as to why they think that this is a problem, and you've got to come on that journey with them to understand what their perspective is. Like I think, based on everything I've seen so far,
Uh-huh.
if you create a student who graduates and is not able to understand and talk sensibly about the technology, its limitation, and be critical about it, you don't have somebody who is employable. That's my view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Makes
agree with you.
Yeah.
Neither AI literate or AI critical. They have to teach. And it would be good to develop a teaching tool if any university would want, that you could work with the university to develop a similar tool like the New South Wales Education Department did for all of their students, so that you use the AI to not just give you the answer, but to come back and guide you on issues that they should be considering, etc., and not always just lay it all out there for you the way we do.
Hmm. Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
I think that
So
would be really
AI
good.
critical.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And it mirrors what we're seeing in business too. The people who thrive aren't the ones who trust AI blindly, but the ones who actually integrate it like a workout for the brain. And now let's all imagine designing a brand new first year core subject, Dr. Brydon. Something every law and business student must take. What should that subject teach to produce ethical, resilient, AI savvy thinkers, AI critical thinkers, the kind of professionals who can thrive in a world where machines assist, but humans still must decide?
I might have already pre-answered this question
I know earlier
earlier in this
you did.
conversation. Yeah, I don't think I will say anything different in response to
Okay,
this question
great.
to
Well,
what I've
I'll
said.
just I'll just I'll just add two words, because when I was in first year, oh my God, long, long, long time ago, I had to do a course, legal research and writing. Did you have to do that at law school? There was the whole subject called legal research and writing. That legal research and writing, we still have to do it, but they have to teach the students all the AI tools that are available, like Leanne, uh, that I met from the University of Seattle Law School, where they actually teach the students the various tools and then teach them how that those tools, they can be used to help make them successful.
Okay, yeah. Being practical, also ethical, as we've discussed previously, it prepares people for the workforce and leadership. And, guys, listening to both of you today, I'm reminded of something I see a lot in business. Tech doesn't remove the need for human skill, it rather raises the value of the right skills. I mean,
If
AI
you
can
have the
teach.
right tool, if you have
Exactly.
the right tool, it will do that.
Mm-hmm. Right. But again, it doesn't replace curiosity, integrity, judgment, or the ability to challenge the status quo. And if anything, those qualifies matter more than now than ever.
Well, I
So,
might challenge that. I think sometimes you can have tools that will improve integrity. You might be in a situation where people are not behaving in a very ethical way, and if your
mhm,
tools are there that catches that and flags that and says, you got to rethink this is not compliant with, say, the law, or or certain kinds of standards, you might have something that actually improves integrity. Like a tool is how you design it, right? And
yeah.
so, sure, it can't replace humanity's curiosity or
Mhm.
humanity's integrity, but at the individual level, it can absolutely improve certain kinds of and stop certain kinds of behavior if you configure it correctly. I do
What
think
do you
that there's
mean? Give me an example.
for example, let's say you were doing a construction project, and you've designed something and you run it through AI. AI might be able to pick up all the different parts of the design that are not compliant with, the National Construction Code. As simple as that. So talking about integrous design, talking about something that conforms with the value expectations of society, your AI is able to catch this at a much higher level than sort of
I guess
individuals.
We can tell you when the contracts are not going to stand up in a court of law. And soon we'll be able to tell you whether the pleadings plead out all of the material facts properly, and we're going to be able to
That's
tell
exactly
you.
it. So you see, you're correct. Your legal tech is actually then improving the overall standard
Yes.
of justice in society.
Yes.
And that's a place for that, because the counterpoint to this is right now we're having a lot of conversations with, say, the Queensland Human Rights Commission or the Australian Human Rights Commission, where they're saying the avalanche of people trying to go through the system and make claims and using AI is actually causing problems.
Yes.
Yeah, where we might actually see a drop in access to justice. And so the question then is, how do we take the gains from technology without actually then also taking so much of the pain?
Yeah, so that's why we've got, like, one of the users wanted what I call the feature law check, where you can upload any document and we'll verify all the legal propositions in there in the citations, not just the citations, which is not as important to me, but that the legal propositions actually are valid legal propositions. And then we've got the appeal check, where you can upload your judgment and we will identify the errors of law. And then now I'm also going to do the pleading check, so that you can upload your pleadings and I will tell you that for each cause of action that you've pleaded, whether you've actually pleaded it out properly.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I didn't do it with the first one was the barrister wanted it because, then you can look at your opponent's submissions and work out whether it stands up. But then the courts were also really interested, and Chief Justice Bell said to me, well, if you can do that, then you'll become very rich one day. But because, they're getting all these litigants in person, etc. They kept getting given all these submissions and documents, and it's just so easy. It would be so cool if you could just drop the document into our checker and it will come back and tell you whether these are actually valid legal propositions.
That's there, or whether there's been, what they call infection, where you take in the legal principles from a different jurisdiction and you're trying to run a legal argument that doesn't exist in Australia. So yeah. Definitely.
Well, that's interesting and a very good point, Dr. Brydon. And thank you, Laina. Thank you for both for sharing your perspectives that make the future feel less intimidating now and a lot more empowering. So thank you, guys. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Miles.
Thank you.
If you guys want to learn more about MiAI Law and the work Laina is doing to transform legal research, head over to myai.law. And if you're curious about Dr. Brydon's research or his governance work, go check out his website, brydonwang.com. And that's a wrap for another episode of Xraised. Tune in again next time, because I'll be back with Laina and Dr. Brydon for another thought-provoking conversation. This has been your host, Miles. Stay focused and inspired with Xraised.